Things have gotten close enough we're actually having to define the commands, and we can see the French have really allowed themselves to spread out too much. They have a lot of out-of-command markers on here. That doesn't mean much. Really, my moving full commands the way I had, full fleets the way I had, kind of finessed the whole issue. It wasn't really a big deal at all. But now that we're close, I do feel like I have to play by the rules, especially since I've got some out-of-command ships right in the area of the British, and I'm going to have to make a few checks on things like initiative and whether those out-of-command stay. These actually are kind of an advantage to the French because some of them will end up in command, and I can move one of them and force the British to move one of their squadrons. And, you know, I mean, I really don't like that whole mechanism of the exchanging moves when you've got single ships that are out of command and end up back in command, counting as a full formation. That really disturbs me. I would actually say the out-of-command ships, some of them should probably move into a semi-command state, which means they don't count as a formation for that, but they are allowed to engage. The game doesn't go into that, though. English win the initiative, and with this big board, actually, until it turns into a cluster, it's going to be pretty easy to keep track of which of these formations moved, and individual ships a little harder. Individual ships are always the hard part, but also where formations can collide and cross these little boundary markers, and I can't keep them straight, which is why I'm using paper, really. Anyway, the English chose to move first, slid forward, and took some fire from the French. They're holding their fire. I'm marking with the rigging markers on the ships because I don't want to have to look up every time I move. It's one thing to look up if I fire, because I have to look up to see, hey, have I port fired or starboard fired off this ship? That's quite often a big question. Whole formations don't tend to fire together in exactly the same way. But these I'm going to need just to move my ships. The one question was, should the British have fired here? The answer is no, not if they're only taking rigging fire. I can get a little closer and do a more devastating fire. Of course, I am giving up a turn's firing opportunity by it. Now that puts it over to the Froggies, and I don't know what to do with them, to tell you the truth. I have a lot of different ships to move. It's not going to be this formation. I want to let these guys move up a little bit more before I get to this. Jeez, I'm kind of an idiot. I wanted to mark that these guys had moved, and I looked for some kind of counter that would work, and I saw the full sails counter, and I've forgotten all about that roll. So anyway, after having moved this little group, 2 out-of-command ships, 1 ship that actually triggered an effect, I don't want to move these guys because they will confuse me, but moving these forward doesn't hurt. The English decided to sail forward and throw full sails up afterwards. That'll give them a few extra movement points with these kind of rearward ships to move forward. Obviously, I don't want to put them on the front of each formation because at least where we're coming in close to engaging. That throws it back to the French, who will start using full sails, presumably, on these rearward ships. And here we are at the end of what? 26 into the 27th turn. 27 is divisible by 3, so we'll have a wind change check here. I guess I should make that right now. No change on the wind. The French have started putting full sail up as well. They're still having command problems here. So this little squadron doesn't have a leader. The leader's back here. He's going to only be able to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fuck. God knows. I don't know where that was. Well, I think it was closer. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think it was back here or something. In range, actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's only going to be able to get a couple of these. Oh, no, it certainly wasn't facing that way. Who the hell knows? Yeah, I'm going to put it out of range. I don't know what it was. The English slicing through the two squadrons. Now, that's great and everything, except they haven't been able to fire. These guys, or they haven't chosen to fire. Basically, if the French can keep a distance, that's going to really hurt the English here. And the English will have to choose to fire. But the French aren't really keeping a distance. You can see this squadron is beginning to penetrate through. The English have to drop their full sails there eventually. They can close a little bit though. You've got a lot of maneuver room there. The effect of the full sails, if you have those suckers on, unfortunately this is paragraph 3.6.3, which is the several page paragraph. The effect of them is they add 2 to firing at rigging, but they add some speed, and more speed the more wind that you have. So these guys here are going to be going like speed 8, as are these. So that's going to tighten this battle up a little bit more quickly. It kind of sucks that I forgot about that during the initial stages, because the French certainly would have thrown more sail on and tried to push their ships up into position with this. But it does create for an interesting situation, I think. Alrighty. English have the initiative, and again, they want to move first. They want to get their either want to cross the T on these things that are approaching them, or they want to try to hit this formation. I think they may. It's so hard because both are good options. I could also split the formation, let one group go here and go kind of out of command. But my command rating isn't that great. Keppel, I think, is a 2. He's hiding somewhere. There he is. Yeah, he's only a 2. I only have a 1 audacity, so I don't get command back very easily. Of course, they could fly back to their. If these guys attack, they could come back and join up with this. I really like the idea of hammering the shit out of this thing, but on the other hand, I don't like the idea of this formation slamming into the British forward unit. English open things up with the first move, and very soon it's going to come to the point where I can't say anything. But they basically dissolve this whole formation, sending some of it out here, some of it up here, trying to put the commander in here to keep as much of it in command as possible. Yeah, I have some chance of some out-of-command units, but to tell you the truth, that's just not that big a deal compared, at least in my opinion, from this game. And this is a huge flaw to the game. This is the perfect situation where there is no way that command should have been broken up. It shouldn't even be possible, basically. But I've just dissolved it, sending some of them off this way, some of them off that way, because I believe it gave me an immediate tactical advantage to do so. And not doing so would open me to a weakness. And I'm able to add some additional firepower into this, hit this up a little bit, soften it a teeny bit for this, and still stave this off a little. The fact that I'm already essentially going to be engaged. Now, the only thing that's going to hurt me here is if the French are able to keep a distance, they can concentrate fire on my ships and take down the rigging on my ships without me being able to fire back with a whole fleet if it's out of command. I'm counting on enough ships being in command, though, that I can still do some damage. The French fleet is spread out and not in good condition there, and I want to isolate these guys and destroy them before the remainder of the French squadron comes up into play. Well, it's time for me to go to work, and that means I've got to try to remember, and I'm using these anchors, that this is the only thing that moved. Of course, video could be very helpful on that, but it's hard to capture my location on the camera and watch it on the camera itself. It's much easier to look back once I have it on the computer. Here the French get to use the advantage of their out-of-command ships, sending one of these. Now this one was out of command but made its roll. It slides through, does a bow cross, and I'll talk about that in a moment because there's something weird about this whole thing. But now it's back on the Brits to make a command. And unfortunately, they only have one loose ship. So basically, they have 3 more activations available. The French have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more activations. So the French can diddle around with their turn. Now, here's the problem. This is always the problem for the French, really, because they like shooting at rigging. Well, crossing the T doesn't help you against rigging, but it helps you against the hull. Firing with the wind doesn't help so much against rigging. In fact, it takes away their bonus in rigging, in rigging fire, but it adds a bonus to hull fire. So they're left with this kind of dichotomy. One, there's the basic choice of you have to hit hull to win the game. You can't just take rigging down. But this one, with its infinite length, may be easier. Of course, ships don't strike due to being out of... ships aren't crippled due to being out of rigging. They could strike if you dismass them. But that means that you're not going to break the enemy fleet as easily by shooting their rigging. There's also the immediate advantage of firing at the hull, but in general I have an advantage shooting at rigging. So it ends up being, I'm not going for one or the other, I'm going for both with the French. The English tend to shoot at the hull no matter what. Overall, it's just the better thing to shoot at, and they're better at it, so it works really well for them. Now I've also got the problem of, okay, how do I remember I moved this ship? And I don't have a good answer to that. I can start using the notes column to mark an M and erase that every turn things move, but with these big formations, it's hard to tell. I don't want to write an M for every unit in the formation, so I'll end up with a few ships with M's and some without, and I'm just not going to be able to solve that problem by writing it. The big counterstacks go away, but they weren't the real issue here. The real issue was remembering what the hell I was moving. And to tell you the truth, I'm not sure which is more of an irritation, the big counterstack or writing things on paper. Anyway, right now, not such a big deal, but oh boy did it hurt in the last battle that I did. And this one looks not that much smaller. I don't know if it's any smaller. It's hard to tell. A lot of map. It's a big battle. All right. Well, let's see what the English do with their action. I moved the English rear column in further. Keeping that fast movement, I'm going to spin around and use some of that movement heading towards the French, which seems a little weird, but fighting sail uses the same kind of mechanism where what wind you catch at the beginning of your turn is what counts. And I think it works fine for something this abstract. And in fact, I'd be kind of worried trying to play something less abstract than this. I really worry about wooden ships and Iron Men here. And with the turning costs, it does take some account into play, but the fact of the matter is I'm going to be traveling in this direction very quickly because of those full sails. It cost me 2 to turn into the wind, and then I'm going to be beating for 6 movement points. That seems a little ridiculous, but whatever. I can deal with abstractions that seem a little silly. What I can't deal with is the rest of, is this game not matching what it's supposed to be doing. Okay, so I forgot to fire this, so I took this fire in play as well. It's not going to get another option at it. Huge fire. First of all, remember this scenario gives this bonus to firing with the wind where you lose it, where you go down a rate. So he goes from a 3 to a 2. He managed to crack another 6 points off the hull and set that thing on fire. It wouldn't have gotten as good a fire as it did over on the Monarch, but such is life, I'm willing to fudge little things like that. Now it's up to the French to move another ship if they like. I'm going to force the English to move their last squadron before I do anything. I want random observation just in the middle of this. It may not make it into the overall review. The break-off system, which I forgot about. Well, it seems to give, but the rules aren't explicit about this, an incentive to withdraw before you've lost the battle fully. Which is to say, if you have a good chance of losing the battle in the more ultimate fashion of breaking, which could come up to like in Quiberon Bay, when I played that, really both sides had an equal chance of losing the battle drastically. And it just really came down to that die roll to determine, the English had a slight advantage because they would have won on points had it had both sides broken at the same time. But if one side, in particular the French, pulled off the map early, before they lost enough victory points, but in a position where they had a chance of losing, again, this is not in the rules, you could say the scenario is over at the point when their last ship leaves the map safely or whatever. If that was the case, and then you counted victory points at that point, you could A, perhaps win, or B, avoid, this could be with either side, avoid taking the full loss of a broken fleet to the more drawn loss of a game that went out to the full extent. This game, as the rules are written, this particular scenario can only end in a fleet breaking. Now the problem with that is your fleet's more likely to break if you have less ships on the map. And I don't think disengagement's really an option in this one, which is strange because essentially disengagement is what happened. Neither fleet broke. Ah, well. Alright, let's try to move some French ships if I can remember where they go. The defensive fire operation, I moved this little French squadron here forward, works. This out-of-command ship moved first. And he moved into the defensive fire range of this English ship, which shot his rigging because of the wind position there. He's firing against the wind. He got a bonus there where he wouldn't get one against the hull. And here I'm really looking at these guys are trying to screw with the movement of that French fleet so it can't come, or squadron, so it can't come to the aid of the van. Well, this particular situation, that English ship there was allowed to fire using defensive fire, but the out-of-command ship's not allowed to respond to that. There's no defense to defensive fire, except I think you are allowed to use your runner guns if somebody's directly on your rake line. But normally you would be able to do offensive fire, but the French couldn't declare that because they're out of command and they didn't start out next to an enemy ship. So they took unanswered fire. No biggie, it was just rigging fire. They're going to get a shot next turn, but it does prevent them from a firing opportunity this turn. Had they had that opportunity, they would have moved here, but they backed sails to stop there. You can see the back end of that formation, at least the actual formation, has been able to move up. I'm going to want to drop those sails at some point, maybe not of the rearmost ship, because I am getting into an engaged situation. British moved their final command over there, up forward, and you can see in here where there was an exchange of long-range fire. The French ship firing at the English hull, the English firing at the French rigging. Again, this is a matter of the wind location working against the tactical doctrine. So basically, if you fire against your tactical doctrine, directly against it, you end up with an even roll if the wind's going directly against what you're trained to do. On the other hand, you get a slight bonus, a +1, if you go against your doctrine. There's no penalty for firing against doctrine. There is a penalty for firing in the wrong direction for the wind. So taking that advantage seemed reasonable here. Hitting some of those, certainly hitting hull hits is always good. Hitting some rigging hits on the French, well, it limits their mobility a little bit. It might cause that formation to break apart a little bit. You also see the English got rid of a lot of their full sails. They still have some back there that are in play. The reason is, well, next turn I will be in range where some fire could happen. I've got to get rid of the full sail now, or else I could take additional rigging hits from it. That's not a good idea. After cleanup and moving to turn 28, can see this one French ship that's on fire here is damaged now. That's actually kind of a difficulty with the not using the hull hit counters on the ships. I'm using sort of a bastard approach here where I'm using some of the counters, the rigging, etc. But the hull hits is kind of, this I can work around. The problem was there were like 15 hits on the Sphinx, and I didn't notice because I don't have a counter right on the value of the ship. The ship contains how many hits it could take. In this case, I think it could take 10. And it's going to be hard to remember when things become vulnerable at this point. I think overall it's still better than all those counters on the map, maybe. Certainly so far it's feeling kind of light, but I haven't really engaged too hard here. Once the battle starts getting full-fledged and it's hard to find the ships and they start getting into tangles where they're not where I expect to find them on here, I think it's going to become more and more difficult. It may be as difficult as the other way of playing was. I'm not sure. Mechanically though, so far it doesn't feel too terrible. It feels like I can overcome that issue. It's just a check that I haven't been making. Oh, have I taken enough damage to go over my limit? I've been worrying about other things. Manpower is another issue. The manpower is kept track of in the other direction. You don't keep track of hits, you keep track of how much manpower is on board the ship. Not too big a deal. If I've got a certain number of hits of manpower on it, I can calculate that on the few occasions where there might be a boarding going on. Anyway. Again, there's always going to be difficulties in any means of keeping track of a lot of information. Just showing you how much difficulty there is to this. And, I really think that the people who enjoy this probably mainly either cheat by cutting away some of the rules of the game, which I've seen evidence of, or play it on Vassal, where you don't have to deal with all this. And then it's a computer game. It's no longer, to me, a board game. I play board games in part for the tactile, for the visual of being able to see this all on a board. But I've seen people playing it with minis or, at Consim Expo. However, they may well be cutting some of the rules out. Like I said, I've seen evidence that some of the people who have played it have been doing that. They note, oh yeah, we don't like these rules. They're too annoying, etc. Sure. Cut away the things that annoy you about the game, and you can say, oh yeah, this is a great game. It's much easier than Wooden Ships and Iron Men. Unfortunately, as written, it isn't much easier to deal with, I don't think. And then you've got okay, yeah, you're tinkering with it kind of at random. When you take away the pass-by rules, which one set gets rid of, wow. I mean, that's really abstracting things away. You're saying you can never have point-blank range fire and stuff like that. That's disturbing to me somehow. All right. As we push our way into turn 28, it's funny. GMT rolls, and I've complained about them, or their effect on me at least, since very early on. They somehow, and I can't really justify the reason, create blind spots for me. I don't see things. I was staring straight at this when I was complaining about the breeze issue here. Weather effects. Breezer would increase the ship's movement. I swear I looked at this and found it. Some scenarios include breezy. You increase the ship's movement point allowance by 1. And deduct 1 from the weather change die roll. Somehow I lost those couple of lines. I have no idea how. Maybe I was looking at the other rule book? I doubt it. Let's see. No, I'm pretty sure I've never even opened this one. This doesn't have, I don't see the weather conditions in here anywhere near it. However, my memory of these rolls is that they were sitting somewhere else on the page. So let's look at weather again. Weather effects, 3.6.3. That is precisely where I am. This is the... I got no idea. I mean, I found this and just didn't see that. Anyway, we're on to another turn. I got to define my orders groups. It looks to me These guys are actually kind of out of order, aren't they? No, they're in command. So it looks to me like I can define a command here, I can define a command here. Now, I can play little games like, I can make some of these out of command, and some of them will end up in command, and then I can play the trade-off, I don't have to move game. Wow, I really do not like the way that rule works out, actually. Because I would make all of these out of command. I would just declare they're all out of command because I'd have a chance of getting in command individual ships and be able to... I think the exception I'm going to make here is if it's not legitimately in command, if it's not a formation command, it counts as the opponent has the option to ignore it as a move. Anyway, I'll figure out what those are. This is not a wind change turn, and then I'll do the initiative and start moving. Right, well, the French open things up by sliding their starboard command through, and this guy's out of command, but the rest of them moved. This one crossing a T here. This poor English ship got pretty battered up. I have this hope that this scenario may actually be better. Nothing to do with the writing, although that is helping, perhaps. But because of the amount of maneuver room and the space that has almost organically developed in these formations, means that, well, it's not going to turn into a tangled mess. These English ships here are going to continue down this way. These guys have another target to go through. It's sort of that, I don't have to just stay in here and fight in a clustered tangle. There's a lot of space and other targets to go after. So there may be better positioning that I can obtain by maneuvering in a way that hadn't been apparent in the other couple of scenarios. I'm really hoping that's the case, because I was looking more for a game of maneuver. Now, this particular may be a rare scenario, taking up this much board. This is all the boards in the game, I think. Weird mixed command that the English have out here. Well, not this ship, but the rest of the command, including one that shouldn't have moved. It was out of command here. I'll take its marker off. It did not open fire additionally. It just, I moved it when I shouldn't have, and that's fine. It's no big deal. But they pummeled the crap out of the Sphinx. Remember, that thing was burning. Well, it's ready to sink now, but almost as bad as the Zodiac here, which got hit at the rear end of the van formation. That's going to put things back in the French hands. I'm not sure where we're going right now. There's a lot less incentive to move this squadron, and some strong advantages to maybe trying to delay. Remember, this doesn't count as an actual ship, though, so I can force them to pass by playing that. I've added that as a little home modification there. Been playing with the extra movement point for the breezy weather. That's an impressive little change. I don't know how much of a difference it makes because everybody gets the extra movement. It just means it's a faster battle in terms of the ships don't get as tangled up, maybe. And maybe that would have helped over at Quiberon Bay too, which certainly had breezy weather, and I forgot all about it. I'm pretty sure. Moved almost everything except the one English large command over here. They were saving for last to try to get the penetration advantage on the French. Now, it's not really an advantage in a sense, because actually defensive fire is probably better. The French sailed right by this out-of-command ship at a distance, no defensive fire. I could have fired at them. That would have allowed them to return fire. I want to keep my first fire and, not get hit by something that's really not posing a threat for a while. This has to get itself back into command to be certain to be a threat. I forgot to move this poor thing. I guess that's got to go too. We push our way here into turn 29. Seeing some penetration between the two forces, the main English force and the French van. This force is going to have to turn in and play in the fight. Now, we're already beginning to see some chaos, though. The English tacked to get into the battle. What they're planning on doing is trying to avoid this and just slice through this some more, win that tangled chaos, then almost impossibly try to form up to face the next two pieces of the French line. The French allowing their fleet to get separated the way they did is basically asking for this. Basically, the English will pass through this. Some will try to slam into it. We'll see who gets the initiative. If the English get the initiative, I don't know. It's hard to tell because some of these English ships have really gotten hosed in terms of movement allowance. But with the breeze, we have +1 movement. So these guys have 3 movement points. That's not going to really get them into the range to lock in really heavily. The French are also sailing their ships kind of close together, which makes it difficult to penetrate them. It means that I have to have enough movement to sail completely through them using the pass-through movements. Now, the English moved right up, nose to nose, so that they'll be able to do that, perhaps. They have 3 movement points coming from here, make it 4 for the breezy conditions. They'll be able to sail through there and line up some point-blank shots against those ships. So there's no real way to avoid it, but there's some gamey kind of stuff because ships can't stop in the same hacks. I think we're good for this one. I'm going to load this one up, and we'll see where this battle goes and if it continues to be kind of fun, because it is enjoyable so far. That first approach part was great. The fighting, it's not so bad, you know. Checking the bookkeeping versus all those stacks of counters. Those stacks of counters would have been impossible in this case anyway, because of the books that I'm using to kind of levitate my board. I'm having some trouble with pooching going on here. I should really have like a solid piece of something to extend the height of this table, rather than rely on things under the board. That never works very well. Unfortunately, that's what I always end up doing.